Hello and welcome to Under My Skin podcast with Dr. Irene. Today I'm super excited because not only do I have an amazing guest that will blow your mind, but we are talking about something that is so interesting to me because as a Chinese medicine practitioner, we're always looking at the physiological elements of the body that's changing so we can rectify and heal. But from my personal experience, I know that our underlying health is always precipitated by our emotional state. So even though we're dealing with something very physical, whether it's joint pains or skin problems, we find that if we go right back to the beginning, a lot of that can have been initiated by some emotional disturbance. So before I introduce you to my guest, I'm going to talk to you about what his accolades are and why I've got him on the show, because I think he's amazing. So Sohial Farzam is an Australian registered acupuncturist and he has been practicing for 20 years. He is also a long-term lecturer at Endeavour College in Melbourne, and he's been teaching there for 14 years. However, he has recently paused his teaching at the college only to expand his teaching publicly, both domestically and internationally. Sohial's main area of specialty is in psycho-emotional imbalances and emotional empowerment. He is well-known practicing acupuncturist in Australia, where he practices an emotional well-being acupuncturist in Multimodality Health Centre. He currently presents many seminars on psychological and mental health conditions around Australia and New Zealand and hosts many industry speakers. Sohial has recently founded the International Integrative Mental Health Conference, a Chinese medicine-based event. This is a first of its kind conference in the world, solely focusing on the mental health. The conference hosts some of the greatest speakers and clinicians around the world. Sohial has also a special interest in psychology, human behavior, neuroscience, quantum physics and physiology. Oh no, philosophy, sorry. He integrates all these study angles into TCM concepts to fully understand the dynamics of the psyche. Now, Sohial also has a company called Needle Pro where he sells Chinese medicine acupuncture supplies. And I'll also have various Facebook groups in the description below where you can connect with him and find out more information, because I think if you start delving into your concerns around your health from a more emotional perspective, that will empower you to create more change in your life. So I'll have all that information for you to click onto and connect with Sohial when you choose to. Okay, so welcome, Sohial. Thank you for being on my show.
Yes, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm glad you proposed this particular topic because I think it's quite important and something that I sort of experience with working clients on a regular basis. I think it's a great topic choice. Good to be here.
Thank you for being here. Okay, so I want to talk, whenever I do anything, I'm always coming from two elements. I'm coming from, me being a patient for, from the time I was diagnosed with psoriasis at 11 and, started practicing when I was 28. Even when I started practicing, my skin was still not 100%. It gradually evolved and got better. But as a patient, understanding where that element's from, but as a practitioner and treating patients and understanding the emotional component behind this eagerness to get better, and, I think it can be relayed in any element of our life. We might have a dream car we want to buy, or a dream home, or we might want to go on this holiday. And this whole desire of wanting to be at that goal almost instantly without being comfortable with the journey that comes with it. I wanted to get into the emotional elements that's creating that impatience within us. I was wondering whether it is about health or whether it is about something else. What is it that drives that impatience within us?
Okay, so I'll try to start from an area that we can all relate to. And you actually said two key words that I might start with. One was desire and two was goals. Goals, but also in the lack of goals. So many people don't actually have any goals, but we'll start with desire. So commercially, we think of desire as something that we should all, relate to, as in I should desire to have this, and I should have desire to, want this. Basically, have many desires, and so commercially, people think that that's a great thing to have many desires, and that's good. But I would like to change that word a little bit to things that we are inspired about, things that are, on our goals in order to attain, and also have intentions rather than desires. So the simple fact that people have desires, many people don't understand that the word desire actually means I don't have. Wow. And so when I say I desire something, it already implies that I don't have it. So psychologically, there's a lack and a void that's being created just by saying I desire this. So when you say I desire, because I desire literally means I do not have, that means then you're going to do everything you can to get something outside of yourself. And the pursuit of doing that, especially when it's not goal orientated, especially when it doesn't come with intentions, the pursuit of desiring something of that which you don't have means the void's going to get bigger. So you're actually creating a bigger gap to go and get the thing that you desire. And the gap between now and the thing that you desire actually gets bigger and bigger, and it accumulates. And then that gap actually becomes the actual obstacle from you getting what you desire. It's interesting, right?
I actually didn't know that desire had a negative connotation to it. It's literally blowing my mind right now.
I would say that commercially, many people, don't have any challenges with that, but I'm pretty big on, looking really at the understanding and the dynamics and the etymology of words. And so I like to sort of focus on certain words and what they actually mean and where they come from. So again, so if I'm desiring, so where I am now, so today, for example, is, Tuesday in Melbourne. And let's just say I desire something in a month from now on a Tuesday, December. So it's, November 9th. So 9th of December, same month from now. Okay. And so this gap between now and December, if I'm desiring it and my focus is on the actual desire of what I want, without really solidly grounded on intention and actual strategic goals to get that, then the gap actually becomes an obstacle, and it actually uses up a lot of energy. And so now I'm consuming my own energy to desire something that which I don't have, right? And so that's where I wanted to start, because I would like for your audience to really understand when they say, I'm desiring this, that sometimes, more often than not, that alone is the actual obstruction. And one of my mentors said, things can either be instructive to you or obstructive to you. And I think just by language patterns, and also and this is also a little bit commercial, but laws of attraction, when we're desiring, we've got to be careful, because it's already saying that we don't have that. Now, if I don't have something, I'm going to feel a void. I'm going to feel like it's missing.
Yeah.
And so one of the most common challenges for human beings is that they perceive things that are missing in them. But there's been studies done about human behavioral traits. And I think it was somewhere down from 18,000 traits to about 4,500 behavioral traits. And the truth is, every single human being has every single trait. And the moment we despise, disown, resent certain traits within us, that's when we lose our self-governance. Now, that's a little bit different, because we're talking about behavioral traits at the moment, but desire is a thing, like an entity. So one of the things that you brought up when you were telling me about this podcast was about desiring to have children, like to start a family. So a child obviously is an entity that becomes your child, that you will hopefully love and support and protect. So at the moment, I'm talking about behavioral traits, but it's the actual trait behind wanting a family. It's wanting that child. What does that child represent? So just to give your audience an example, I had a client who came in with 6 children, and she had some challenges, health issues. And she said, if we can get on top of these health issues, my goal is to have another child. So that was her desire, to have a 7th child. But the trait that was behind that was a lack of fulfillment in the relationship. So she was actually using the child to fix the problems in the relationship.
And I think a lot of people do that, don't we? We kind of have this void that's too hard to fill, so we bring something else to come and fill that void.
Yes, correct. And before I actually get onto the goals, which I was going to talk about, I might start, talking a little bit about the voids. So, because this is really where it all starts from. So many people have voids at any given time, and voids are simply things that you perceive as missing. Right? So, for example, I came from a country, war-torn country. So we came into Australia when I was very young, and because of the nature of safety and security with the family dynamic, because we came out of, we left Afghanistan, where I'm from. We walked to Pakistan in the middle of a war. There was tanks, there was jets, there was machine guns, there was bullets flying. And so we actually had to hire soldiers to help us smuggle ourselves out of the country. Now, I was pretty young, so I have memories, but perhaps it wasn't so much traumatic because I didn't have enough consciousness to really understand the meaning of it. Yeah. But for parents, that would have been pretty hard. And so coming into Australia, their sense of protection, security, and staying together was huge. Mm-hmm. Now, that void, the opposite of that, which is not staying together, could become a void. So growing up, the dynamic of staying together created a void, which was the opposite in me, which was independence. Mm. And so now I'm seeking independence. Well, not now, but growing up in Australia, I was constantly trying to seek independence because the void was I don't have independence. Why? Because the nature of the security and the bond and the bind in the family dynamic was so strong. Mm. So then my values, which stem from voids, and the values are the actions I'm taking in my life. So my actions, I'm trying to seek independence, come from my voids because I feel I don't have it. Mm-hmm. And that's the void. I perceive that I didn't have independence, and therefore my actions are created based on certain value traits to go and seek independence from outside of the family dynamic. So being with friends, going out, going overseas, which I did a lot. And so if you looked at my actions, I had a high value on traveling. Mm. And that was because the void was I felt like I didn't have independence. Yeah. No. Now, the truth is I did have independence because that's what I'm teaching here, that all traits are never missing. They're only transformed, just like it says in physics and also Chinese medicine, that energy is not created or destroyed. It's only transformed in its actual form.
Right. Okay.
So it's important for us to understand that when we have voids, we'll then create values to go and fulfill those voids. And there's nothing really wrong with that, so long as the outside world is not governing the inside world.
Right.
And so when I'm desiring something, I'm putting it out into the external world and I'm saying, I need that from you because I don't have that within. Yeah. And that's when I lose my self-governance. When I lose my self-governance, I become a slave to the world.
Yeah. So if I've just got someone in mind, a patient of mine who came in with psoriasis, and I guess, when you're talking about trying to get the outside world to fulfill that inside need, so she was she was struggling a lot with her skin actually as she was going through the process, getting worse instead of getting better.
Yeah.
And that element then eventually got her to use steroid creams because she was using steroids. She came off the steroids, everything erupted, and she was like, I can't wait for this process. I just don't have the time. I've got work, I've got family. I need to go back to the steroids. So what's going on in that situation where someone potentially wants to get better, they want to actually heal, but then they just don't give their body the time it needs to heal?
Yeah. So psoriasis is a condition, and condition is a label. So if I'm trying to heal psoriasis, so let's say I have psoriasis like your client. And by the way, so if I don't know what psoriasis is, I might go and get a medical checkup. And, the GP might say, oh yeah, well, this is actually psoriasis or dermatitis or, whatever the condition is. And so then that label becomes an attachment in my mind. So now the easy thing of that is, okay, well, now I know what it is. So that's kind of like a relief. I know what it is. But then the simple attachment to that label causes a separation between mind and body, which is now that this condition shouldn't be on my body. And because it's been labeled, it is something that I shouldn't have. Well, your body's presenting it, which means you have it. So, trying certain things that doesn't help and then saying, okay, well, actually, I'm going to go and seek out, corticosteroids, for example, these things help. Well, yeah, they're probably true. It does help. But we know, like, I guess as practitioners, you and I, that most skin problems are never a problem of the skin. They're generally a problem of assimilation and elimination of the internal bowels, right? The small intestine and large intestine primarily. So now it's like, because I've put a label on the condition or someone's helped me diagnose this label, I now feel that it's separate from me. And if it's separate from me, that means it's an external problem. Right? And because it's separate from it's an external problem, it shouldn't be there. And so I'll just do whatever it takes to just get rid of it or just suppress it. And so my rush to get that done, because I'm seeing immediate relief, fuels my rush to keep going with that. But I'm sure you would know, I mean, you're primarily working with skin. Most often than not, these are maintenance measures that perhaps work symptomatically, but they never really get rid of the long-term solution. So then my thing would be with your client is, when you're having these challenges with psoriasis, and first of all, to acknowledge when it's coming up. So when did it actually start? And it's not normally the day when it started. Like, let's just say today I noticed a few patches. That's when it started. So Tuesday, the 9th of November is when my psoriasis started. It's not so much that. It's normally about 2 to 5 years before that. What is happening in your life that's causing disturbance in the way you are, your character, your personality, stress, in effect, was what we're talking about, that challenge you enough to then create a bodily function to shift into from a physiology to pathology, for then your body to get your attention, right? And so, unfortunately, conventional medicine labels things as disease, but even the word disease is disease, right? I'm not at ease. And so my thing would be to go back a couple of years to maybe a few years beforehand and ask some questions about what's been happening in life. So most skin conditions, because skin is your first layer of protection between yourself and the external world. So the simple touch, I put my hand on your skin, is your boundary, right? So skin is the boundary. It's also the largest organ. It's a detox organ. And so psoriasis and acne and dermatitis normally represent certain psychosomatic attributes. And one of these particular, or a couple of these things are, one is about boundaries, right? So regulating or dysfunctional regulation of boundaries. People come in or I come out, so I can't regulate that shell. The other thing is oppressing or someone oppressing, and you're surrendering to that oppression of your authentic power, which is essentially about control and responsibility. And it could also actually go back as far as in your first cycle of life. So let's just say the first 10 years of life. Some aspects about comparison between you and your parents, either the mum and the dad. So now if we look at psoriasis in these terms, it can go back as far as the first cycle of life, right? And so if I'm seeking the medication, yes, it might help superficially, but I always have to ask, what was the cause? So if I'm 20 years old and I got psoriasis 15 years old when I was 15, so 5 years ago, how come I didn't have that at birth? So what happened at 15 and before for me to have it now? So it's more important to look into the why. So human beings have a tendency to focus on the how, like, how do I fix this damn problem, right? But there's a statement in psychology that says when the why is big enough, the hows will take care of themselves. So the how is the corticosteroid creams. That's the how, which will help, but it's not going to address the why. And so your skin is so, well, not your skin, your body is so intelligent that I believe so much in the body that it's not random that you're having these problems. And so addressing the cause would be the most important thing, to understand, why is my body trying to get my attention, in this case through psoriasis.
And I think when you're delving down that road, or delving down that path of identifying what's been the precipitating factor, I think there could also be that element of suppressing various things that happen to you and not necessarily wanting to go down that road because, like you said, definitely skin is this suit of armor. And when you have that skin disease, it protects you even more. So to really, open yourself and create that vulnerability to say, right, well, this is what happened. And this was that shift that created, because I've done a lot of work in that, because I've wanted to know, what was it? And there was something that came up where at 8 years of age, I was basically left at school by a relative. And she just said to me, there's no room in the car for you, and just left me. And when I was doing this work, the person I was speaking to, she said it wasn't the instigator, but it definitely started that ball rolling. And she said to me, what did you think when that happened to you? What was the words that went into your mind? And I said, I wasn't good enough. And, I got psoriasis at 11, but that was at 8 years of age. And so believing that I wasn't good enough was this, thought that carried, and probably, I don't know, but I probably used it and thought, well, this happened. So yes, that is true that I'm not good enough. And so then eventually, precipitated into a physical form of psoriasis. So sometimes it can be very confronting for someone to go down that road. But I think it's so important, because then you get into this cycle of flare-ups and recovery and flare-ups and recovery, and this roller coaster ride where you're really not tapping into the actual cause that has led to the disease manifesting.
Yes, correct. And it is causing challenges around opening up and becoming more visible. So vulnerability is a big deal. However, true transformations in healing come when you address the cause. Yeah. There's a statement that goes like this. It says, until cause equals effects, there is no healing. So cause and effect. So the effect is the manifestation, but the manifestation comes from the cause. And so until cause equals effect, then it's very hard to heal. And so should your client want to continue with sort of these kind of creams? Of course, right? She has free will. She has freedom of choice. She can do that for the rest of her life. Will it help? Yeah, most likely. It's probably helping right now. Will it address the cause? Highly likely not, right? Now, how will that cause play up, and how will it be expressed throughout her character and physiology? That's a different question, and that is dependent on what you're talking about, suppression. So if I'm, so if I'm suppressing the cause, let's just say something happened, like in your case, at the age of 8, something happened where you felt you weren't good enough. And let's just say you haven't addressed that entirely. And so what happens is your character, your biology, then it dictates your psychology. And so your psychology is the behavioral attribute that you are now expressing into the world. Now, if you have a solid awareness of what happened at the age of 8 years old, it means you have conscious awareness of that event. The challenge is you may not know how to deal with it. But if it's within your awareness, in Chinese medicine, we call that in that middle level of blood, so blood level. And so blood obviously carries the impurities that then can actually leak out into the skin. So suppression is having conscious awareness of the cause, but not having contextual meaning to do something about it. But repression is not knowing the cause because it was too painful in the first place. And so many people who carry certain emotional traumas from the past, generally it's from the past, right? And then you project that into the future. And then so you have this past future dynamic, which in the middle is anxiety. So then you have this anxious state that you're constantly living in because your mind is anticipating a future event, which is a threat that hasn't happened yet. And that's based and governed on the past because you haven't dissolved and liberated from the memory of the past. So you have this past future dynamic, and in between, your body has to get your attention. So it creates this constant anxiety. And then the anxiety causes stress, and then the stress further exacerbates your problems. And all this is happening because there might have been an event in the past that you have repressed, which was an intelligent response from your body for self-preservation. But the challenge is that repression is using up your resources. So I think probably 20-30% of your immune system on a day-to-day basis is being used up to hold an emotion in place. Now, imagine you living life functionally, but having certain strands of your hair attached to the past. So 30% of your energy is into the past, and you're trying to live your day. So you have chronic fatigue, or you have stress, and you have all these other conditions coming up. So suppression is understanding that there was a problem, but I just have no contextual meaning on how to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
But what's worse is repression. When in Chinese medicine, we say it attacks the yuan level, which is the marrow, the deepest level of who you are, constitution, where it was so painful that it's there, but you have no awareness, but other people probably do.
Yeah.
Right. And people keep saying, "I keep doing this." And they go, "No, it's not me, it's you." Right. And so we keep projecting blame outside of ourselves. So therefore we are disowning the cause and expressing a manifestation of the effect. So until we can address the cause, it's going to be very hard to fix the effect.
So okay, so we've got two groups of people. We've got people, the group that aren't aware of what the issue is, and then we've got the group of people that are aware but potentially haven't dealt with it.
Yeah.
When coming to address that in your clinic with patients, is there a different process you would take someone down? And I guess one question I've always wondered, and maybe you can answer, when someone is experiencing anxiety, stress, and all these sort of things, and there's been trauma of the past, do they need to relive that trauma to heal it? Or can they heal without going back to that moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it depends on different perceptions on therapy. Mm-hmm. So for example, there are certain therapies who don't promote reliving the trauma because, like, why would you do that? Because it's going to, bring up certain things. But then there's certain therapists who would think, well, actually, that's kind of where it started from. So it's probably a good idea to address it. So I'm in the camp of addressing that specific event at the very specific time. So being very, very real with it. Now, we were just talking about cause and effect. You have someone who's well known, Joe Dispenza. He talks about causing an effect. So he actually doesn't really promote reliving the trauma because he says his model is based on something that I'm interested in as well, which is quantum physics. So he's talking about causing an effect, an outcome based on future imagination of what you would like. And because the body doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's not, what happens is that your body starts to play this story. The prefrontal cortex kicks in, and it kind of reviews the landscape of your brain, the terrain, and uses every possible resource from your past to help you navigate to a particular goal that you want in the future. And so your body has this power to epigenetically start to make physiological changes to get you prepared for that future event, because that thing that you want, you may not be ready for. So you have epigenetic changes in your system to help you get what you want now. So you're getting the future by changing now. So that's what he talks about. So his model is not so much going into the past. And I like that model because neurologically, it does actually make sense. But my model is really understanding where the perception went wrong, right? So we have perception. Perception is essentially senses. It's governed by our senses, so the 5 senses. And that's what really allows us to live life in a 3D world. And that perception governed by the senses is governed by the limbic brain, which is the emotional brain. And so if you have a memory of the past, and if you're trying to, in essence, avoid that, you can do it, right? I just found that it's not a very optimal way of living life. So you'll probably never know what's capping you. And what's probably capping you, you might be living a pretty good life, but to what extent, right? Because there's a difference between your reality and actuality. So your inner reality is different to what's actually happening, actuality. And trauma has the challenge of obscuring or distorting your reality, right? So my thing is to go into that memory, into that event, exactly that event. So this, where was it? When was it? What time was it? What were you doing? Who was there? Who was expressing it? Were you expressing it? Who was witnessing it? And so by doing that, you realize that all events are neutral until someone makes a judgment.
Mm.
Right? So therefore, when the judgment comes in, I've now distorted my perception on that event. And that's a self-preservation mechanism. So it's good.
Yeah.
But again, it's going to be running the show. It's going to be running live. So I go back in time to help people go into that event, into that moment, the very specific moment, and then help them neutralize their imbalanced perceptions they created on the pain. Right? Now, if you think about it, many people remember the positive aspects of life, right? But they have a higher emotional quotient with emotional trauma. So the higher the emotional trauma, the higher the emotional quotient. What that means is the higher the emotional quotient, the more intense it's implicitly embedded in my implicit memory. And implicit memory actually changes the way you can, it actually changes the way you are in terms of habits and conditioning. So now if you think about it, if implicit memory, which was charged up by a high emotional quotient, which was charged by a high emotional trauma, affects the conditioning of who you are, that means you are capped, right? Because your story is carrying and is in bondage to a particular trauma, and you have diverted from your true, authentic expression of who you are based on trauma. And so now you are living a life deviated away from your true self. And so if we have a linear line going up and a kind of like a diagonal line, 45 degrees going out, that's my trauma line, which is taking me away from my authentic line. And in between those two lines is a gap, and that gap is the signs and symptoms that you experience in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so signs and symptoms are your body's mechanisms, intelligent mechanisms to help homeostate all these imbalanced perceptions that you're carrying in order for you to come back to authenticity, which my version of authenticity is true love. And true love means at all given events, you are worthy of love. And everything that has ever happened to you or has not happened to you, as my mentor said, you are worthy of love. And that's actually the fundamental laws of yin and yang, which is the synthesis and synchronicity of complementary opposites. It was never separated, right?
It's amazing.
So summarizing it, my version is to go into the event, into the memory, and we got to be careful with labels. So like abuse is a label. Well, I was abused. That's a label. I can't go back in time and change that. No, you can't either. No one can.
Mm.
So in the moment of the abuse, what was it that created and triggered that perceived experience that you were having? So for example, one of my clients who had 40 something years of depression, lady, female, she was angry at her father and mother, but mainly her father and her brother who abused her. But yet the actual charge was nothing to do with abuse. It was that my mom didn't support me.
Yeah.
But if I worked on the abuse, I could never fix that problem because I can't go back in time and change that. That objectively happened. That's true.
Yeah.
But it's the perception that needs to be dissolved to liberate you from the emotional baggage so that you can experience true love, which is yin and yang, synthesis and synchronicity of complementary opposites.
And so when someone holds on to that, because I think, there's a righteous element of this was done to me and that person hasn't paid, or, I haven't been, I haven't received an apology or whatever, because I know one of my patients, she was abused by a grandfather and he's now passed, but, her health is not great. And it was always a conversation where she never got an apology. The issue was the whole family didn't acknowledge it, even though it had been done to her cousins and her mum and all the siblings. So it had definitely been a generational thing. But she was the only one that was speaking up, saying, what's wrong with you all? None of you are addressing the elephant in the room. And I feel this emptiness because I never got an apology. So what happens, I guess what's happening there, to have that, I don't want to use the word righteousness, but having that, I guess, the surrendering to what happened and being okay to move forward as opposed to holding it and living by it.
Yeah, that's a great point, and also something that comes up often in clinic. And I'll actually answer that by the very first thing we started off with, which is talking about desire. So that's a great example. She's desiring that grandparent, grandfather, I think you said, she's desiring that for that apology, right? And now she's gone and she's suffering, right? And so the desire to get that apology that never came, now she's using that, I guess, victimization to sustain that. So now he's gone, but she's still suffering.
Yeah.
So the desire to grab something, okay, that's no longer there and will never be there. So what happens? That means she's governed by the external world. And there's a statement that says, it's a little bit tricky actually for most people. It says, pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. Right? We all experience pain, but to suffer and stay with it is an actual choice. And people sometimes would say, what do you mean, Sohial? Do you think I want to be feeling this? Do you think I want to be suffering for 40 years of depression because my father abused me? Actually, if you look at the laws of creation, yes, because most people don't realize, unfortunately, it might be a bit hurtful for some people to hear this, but if you understand the nature of the human body and the laws of creation, you are the cause and the co-cause of everything that has happened around you, because thought creates energy, and energy actually subjects and moves into matter and actually shifts matter. So if someone comes in and abuses you and you have no control, I understand that, right? I understand that completely. And you can argue that you had no control. That is true. But again, I am not talking about the label, which is the abuse, because you don't carry the abuse as an emotional charge. You carry what the abuse did to you and your personality, which again is I lost control. I didn't have control. They took my accountability. I had no power. They took my power. So all these things I can work with, right? Because those can change because it's based on an imbalanced perception. So coming back to your client's story, so if she's desiring this apology, and let's just say it's been happening in many generations, which is true, and that's happened. So she's saying, well, what the hell is wrong with you people? Like, don't you see this? This needs to be addressed. This elephant in the room needs to be addressed. And that is true also. That needs to be addressed. Because obviously we're not condoning whatever that grandpa was doing. That was, invading her space, her body, and so on. But if she's being victimized by that circumstance, instead of being a master of her destiny, she's being a victim of her history, then she's the one that's in suffering, right? And that to me is worse off than the apology, right? Because now someone else is governing your internal story. Yeah. So when your internal world is greater than the external world, as one of my mentors said, you become a master of your world. But if the external world is governing your internal world, you become enslaved by that world. And you can forever want an apology that you'll probably never get. So I'll just give you a live example of a very similar event. I had a client who, her father groped her and kind of, was a bit sexual around her while they would hi and meet and greet each other. And this is the father. And this happened up until sort of I think maybe she was 50 or something years old. And eventually she addressed the mum, the father, and the brother, and they completely denied it and said, you're crazy. And then they actually disowned her, my client. They disowned my client, right? And so she came to me and said, so what is it? Because one of the things I teach is there's an advantage to every decision you make. And she goes, well, I finally did what you said, and now they've disowned me. What's the advantages of being disowned? And I said, well, first of all, the whole event was denied because they wanted to minimize the pain of the family dynamic. It could have disturbed the family dynamic. It could have broken the family. Your mum didn't say anything because she wanted to keep the relationship, because she would have been probably isolated and lonely towards the end of her life. Your brother didn't say anything and support you, probably because he was also being groped, right? And so your father completely denied it and put the responsibility back on you. I said, you are probably the first person in the history of your generations to stand up for this. And yes, they might have disowned you physically or psychologically, but you stood your ground, and you're going to change this dynamic for the rest of your future generations. Yeah. Right. And what's interesting is about 8 months later, her dad died. Wow. And so I think, I didn't know the dad, so it's more of a guess, but just from my experience, I think the dad died because of the actual nature of the guilt that he was carrying that was surfaced. Yeah. And she wrote a 6-page letter, not the conventional letter that many therapists advise, which I don't agree with, which is just write a letter and tell them about all the things they did to you and how you're pissed off and all this kind of stuff. There wasn't that letter. It was a letter of gratitude of every single experience that ever happened and what she learned from those experiences. And it was even hard for me to acknowledge some of the things that she would have learned from that experience. And I've got a 6-page letter in my clinic drawer of this particular client with full transformation of this event after the father died, right? So it really comes down to a choice, because we all have a choice, right? And Viktor Frankl, who's the author of Man's Search for Meaning, said he was in the Holocaust and he survived all the events of that. And he basically said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, when we lose control, like when we no longer have control of an event, then there's only one thing that we can control, and that is to control our perception towards that event. And William James, father of modern day psychology, also said one of the greatest gifts a human being has is their ability to change their minds.
Yeah.
And changing your mind is about the perception. And if we've got enough time, I just want to spend a minute on perception, because this is important.
I'm going to ask you to do that. I actually wanted to go into the whole context of what perception is, because I think that can be so empowering for someone, because, you know, that's what's going to, you know, create that change when someone can shift their perception.
Exactly. So remember, perception is really governed by the senses.
Mm-hmm.
And the senses is governed by the limbic brain, essentially the mammalian brain, but also the reptilian. So I've got to build up the groundwork for this first. So unfortunately, in Chinese medicine, we come from the utero. Well, in human beings, we come from the utero, but in Chinese medicine, the utero is seen as prenatal. So before birth, essentially, prenatal existence. And prenatal concept in Chinese Taoism and Chinese medicine philosophy is really something that is governed by heaven, divine intervention. Right. So if you think about it, you can eat as good as you like as a mother, but what's actually running the show, right? Yes, you're giving the nutrients to your unborn child, but the whole mechanistic physiological development is really a miracle, right? So something other than you as the mother is governing that. And so in Chinese medicine, we say there's a prenatal intervention, and that's really a divine, heavenly inspired event. And when we come into life, so when we're born, we come into postnatal existence. So the first trauma for a child is the cutting of the umbilical cord, right? I mean, the actual birth trauma can also be traumatic, of course, but the real trauma is when, you know, the cutting of the cord, because now there's a separation. So we come from unity into duality. And so the child then seeks the mother as attachment for love. And so an infant needs love more than food. They actually grow more with love than food. And now if you take the love away, so if the child doesn't land on the mum's chest for bonding, so for example, if there was a traumatic birth and the child is taken away for a week or two or longer, then that gap from the time the child came out to the time the child lands on the mum's chest, or it could be the dad's as well. So just that bonding is what I'm talking about. That gap determines the attunement phase between the child and the mum, or the primary guardian. And the attunement is the bonding. So the entrainment of the heartbeats between the mum and child is what builds the attunement, and the attunement is what builds bond, and then ability to build a bond with someone else, another human being. And then that phase of bonding is how you develop your ability to bond with everyone else for the rest of your life. So imagine that went wrong, right? So now you have this void that you have no completion, because in our medicine, we have this REN channel. It's also the sense, it's called the state of completion. So if I'm not feeling complete and whole because I didn't get the bond, which is the binding, now I'm going to have this void to go and get that. And then I'm going to project that onto people and try to get it from others, because I didn't get it from my primary caregivers. Now, if you don't get it from other people, then you'll displace it. So in psychology, they call it displacement. You might displace it, which is very common, on food. So in teenage years, anorexia and bulimia is very common, with a lack of bond that you perceived was missing. So again, coming back to now perception. So we have this animal mind, which is the reptilian brain, which is an all or none thinking, right? So it's either this or that. So it's basically black and white. And when we govern ourselves and we transform and we learn and we adapt and we evolve in life, we go into the mammalian brain, which is obviously the emotional brain. So we are no longer living more so in a survival consciousness, which is more the reptilian brain. The mammalian brain, if it's governed by yourself, if it's self-governed, you have heart consciousness. And then the largest part of the brain, which is 40%, I guess, bigger than the other brains of mammals, the neocortex, that's more soul consciousness, spirit soul consciousness. Now, if you go back to that bottom brain, the reptilian brain, we have a lot of our judgments there. So you did this to me, and I did this to you. So it's basically gain and loss. So all emotions that are more primitive, and primitive means all or none. So primitive, when you're using all or none emotions, so for example, you did this to me, or it's my way, the highway kind of language, you're using a primitive response in your nervous system. And a primitive response in the nervous system is the neuron level. So it's very quick and reactive, right? Instead of proactive and active. So when we're using animal behavior, we become like an animal. We become a consumer, which means we need immediate satisfaction, which was one of the things you wanted to talk about. So that immediate need to satisfy ourselves is an animal behavior. And we need it more importantly from other people, because we're not self-governed, because we are acting primitively, right? And so that reptilian need of survival and to eat or die kind of thing is how we play out our behavior. Now, if we start to own the judgments, own our emotions, and it's not black and white, and there's other points of view, we start to transcend the animal mind where we get into the mammalian brain. So now we get into sort of the basis of the basal ganglia and the limbic brain. And if we govern that, that's heart consciousness, which means we govern our hearts, right? And the concept of the heart, the actual character of the heart in Chinese medicine, is an empty bowl, which is detachment, right? And this is what I was talking about with the desire. It's when I'm saying I desire something, it means I don't have it, right? Well, the heart is essentially a void. It's empty, right? So detachment plays a big role. And the Buddha said, when you're trying to attach to that which is unattachable, and you're trying to avoid to that which is unavoidable, is the source of human suffering, right? And that's true, because we're trying to attach to something other than ourselves. And so in that animal level, we are dependent. We have juvenile dependent traits on other people. When we get to the mammalian brain, we start to become more independent. We start to focus on ourselves. So we have intention and attention to arouse the heart consciousness. When we get to the neocortex, the spirit soul level, we have interdependence, which means there is other people in the world. So if I can help you get what you want, you'll probably help me get what I want. And now we have interdependence. And so the higher consciousness of spirit soul level is really an optimal way of living life, which is a celestial way of living life compared to a terrestrial. Terrestrial is trial and error, which is on the animal earth level. And in Chinese medicine, we have the earth level, the heaven level, and the polarization, the integration of heaven and earth creates man, which is in the heart level. And so humanity, is the integration of heaven and earth, which means we are governed by above. So we have faith, but we should also be grounded on below, which is earth. And if every time we try to avoid the earth, which means we want something out there. So for example, in another lifetime, right? We are avoiding ourselves. So we're not grounded. And that's what's causing the ABCDs of disease, because we are trying to always avoid something within ourselves without owning it. And Carl Jung calls this the shadow, right? So we have many shadows. I kind of went off context. I'll get back to perception at some stage.
I'm wondering how, because definitely I think a lot of us are outward thinking. How do we connect to earth? Is that being in the present moment? Is that the way that we connect to the earth?
Okay, so that's good, because that's going to lead me to answer the perception, and then I'll relate that to the out there context. So just quickly on perception. So perception is half of an information. It's half piece of an information. So it's not a whole complete vision. So perception is a half vision. Okay. And the way energy works, so energy basically follows thought, right? And so you have a thought, and then it creates a movement and energy. And the word energy obviously is to move, right? So emotion means to move. So it's to move out essentially. And so perception is that, because it's governed by the senses. And if I just said that mammalian brain governs the senses, and if you're not governed within yourself, then the mammalian brain has to reside on the reptilian brain, which is survival. So your perception to survive is how you're going to live life, but that's not very an optimal way to live life, which is solely focused on survival.
Mm.
I mean, your brain has the capacity to do that right now with the way your heartbeat is beating without you even thinking about it is a reptilian context. But perception is half true. What does that mean? Because human beings see 1/50th of 1% of the information that's out there because of the electromagnetic spectrum of what we can see with our vision. So, for example, I can't see gamma rays, right? I can't see infrared. So I can't see radio waves. I can see, my vision can see a very narrow segment of the electromagnetic spectrum, which I can't remember exactly, but I think it's between 380 to about 700, whatever the measurements they use, nanometers or something. So that's what I see. Now, if we relate this to simple maths, just so we can get our audience to understand what we're talking about, I basically see 2,000 bits of information on a daily given event. But there's 50 billion bits of information that's coming in and out of existence per second, right? There's so much information coming in and out of existence. And I'm only seeing, so let's just say 50 billion pieces of information. I'm only catching on a daily basis 2,000 bits, right? So that's not a lot of information, right?
Yeah.
So my reality is very narrow.
Yeah.
But the actuality beyond my narrow segment is something that I can't see. Why? Because it's governed by my perception of what I can see.
Yeah.
So that's why information is half true, because you only see your inner reality. But I can see something different. So, for example, right now, if you're in this, wherever you are now, and let's just say there's a car accident outside and there's this massive bang outside. And let's just say, God forbid, you had a massive car accident 3 weeks ago. So you're still, charged up by that event. You see all these people rush into that car accident outside your clinic or your house, wherever you are. And all these people are trying to help the person who just had an accident. But you've gone into a freeze mode and you're just looking, but you're just frozen, right? So some people are moving towards danger. You've essentially gone into what's called a dorsal vagal response and collapsed into yourself because of the danger. So it's one event, two different pieces of information, right? Because you carry an emotional charge for that event of the accident because you had one 3 weeks ago, let's say, right? So if the other people are moving into danger, that means their reality is different to yours. So the actuality is different to your inner reality. Okay. So now that we understand that perception is half true, this is why we constantly seek an external world for us to be fulfilled. And the word fulfillment means to fill for the mind. So we are constantly looking at things to fill ourselves, but the problem is we're putting it out there. We want to get it from out there. Now, there's nothing wrong with being outside of yourself, but there's a difference between creating strategies to create goals and anticipating threats that will come in the way of your goals. So by all means, I mean, I teach business as well. And one of the things I teach is creating goals, but create strategies for goals. Don't anticipate. See, many human beings don't have any goals. So they just submit to life. And so whatever happens, they go, well, this is it. This is what happens. No, you were a creator. You're a genius, right? Up until the age of 2 or 3, you were about 97% creative. 8 to 12, it drops down to 2%. You've lost your creativity. Yes, that's true. But you're innate genius with creative potential. And so create goals, create a vision, create a purposeful life, a meaningful life, and then create strategies so that you can go towards that. But don't let them be governed by the external world. The word government means to govern the mind. So most people rely on the government. So they watch TV and they get governed by whatever the media says and they lose themselves in the process.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's what we're going through right now, isn't it?
Exactly.
I think it's interesting because you touched on the inability to create goals, and someone pops into my mind, and I often hear conversations where we have, and it's always done in a kind of joking manner, but it's now that you're speaking, it's dawned on me that there was always a crushing of goals in their childhood. And so now as an adult, they struggle to create those goals. And it's just literally because I might have a conversation going, well, what are your goals? And that can't be answered. But it's either, I'll have to think about it, or I'm not sure. And then now it's literally like a little light bulb that's gone on in my head and gone, oh, right. So that's essentially an issue. So how do you, if someone is struggling to create goals, possibly from not having the support in their upbringing, how do they flip that switch to create those goals?
Yeah. So the truth is we always have support, okay? In upbringing, no matter how much challenge we have, there's a need. Every single human being has an agenda, okay? And that's because we perceive more advantages to disadvantages to any given event at any given time. So even through trauma, the need to have the connection of your parents, even though maybe it came through abuse, was greater than the actual abuse. So the truth is, and it might seem a little bit painful to people who haven't had, the work done with them and stuff. The truth is, if I'm being abused and my security of the need to have my parents in my life while I'm having abuse is greater than the abuse. So the perceived advantage is actually greater than the negative consequences of the abuse. So we are always supported, but we are also challenged at the same time. So every single human being, remember, expresses all traits. So we are supported and challenged. We have pain and pleasure at all given times. It's just that we have this tendency to seek more the pleasure and seek happiness and to avoid the pain, which is actually a little bit futile because it's unrealistic and unsustainable. Okay? So coming back to the goal. So when we are up until the age of 2 years old, we're essentially asleep. Okay. So we're in delta brainwaves. And then from about 2 to about 8 years old, 6, 7, 8 years old, we're in theta brainwaves. Theta brainwaves for our audience basically means we're in hypnosis. And so hypnosis means we're conditioned or we're vulnerable to being conditioned. And so up after the age of sort of 7, 8, we move into a bit more alpha brainwaves and then to beta brainwaves. And so our day-to-day life from about the age of 11 onwards, we're really in high beta frequency. And beta has 3 different divisions within. So there's like high, low, and medium range, but it really means just like how you navigate through life. That's beta. And so when you come back to sleep at night, you go back in sort of alpha brainwaves, you get relaxed, then you get a bit sleepy and you go to theta brainwaves. And then when you're an adult, it's very hard to get delta brainwaves, but you do get some. Infants get a lot of delta because that's when development happens. Now, so in that second phase of that theta brainwave, you're conditioned. So every time you've been told no by someone, like you said yourself, Irene, if you say no, well, that's going to have an imprint. Right? And research has shown by NASA that you've been told no, you've been literally told no, you can't do this, you won't do that, you won't make that, you can't do this. You've been told no about 185,000 times by the time you're age 18. And so that's going to have a massive, massive impact on how you feel about yourself, right? And so people lose this feeling that they can't achieve or accomplish anything. And what's interesting is in Chinese cosmology, the number 9, which is the number of points on your heart channel or heart meridian, 9 means the state of completion. So your heart is actually striving for completion before you leave this planet, which means it's trying to live an optimal life. And by the way, the heart, according to Chinese philosophy, has never been tainted by pain. It's the pericardium, which is the buffering system that has, and that controls all the events in your life that comes in to protect it. So it's like a barrier. But then that pericardium becomes your superego to protect you. So it's not very optimal. But anyway, so state of completion is to achieve things greater than yourself, which is purposeful. So anything that's happened in that first cycle of life will really determine your patterns of behavior. And so by the time you're about 35 years old, 95% or so of your life is unconditioned conditioning, unconditioned patterns of habituation. So you're basically living by habit. Yeah. And so you don't even know what's right or wrong anymore because it's just conditions. Yeah. So most people don't have goals because they're not willing to explore themselves. They're not willing to take some time to become present, to actually say, you know what do I want in this life? Yeah. What do I want to create? Am I even capable of creating something in life? And so because we don't do that, we don't ask those questions, we just simply submit to life. And so whatever life throws at us, we just kind of take and say, well, that's what happened to me. And then the problem with that is then you'll blame it on fate. And then you'll say, this is my fate. This is where it's going to happen. This is what's been happening. And this is why I keep attracting the same crap that I keep attracting. No, if you understand the laws of creation, you are responsible. The moment you take responsibility, you can shift your life, you can change your life, right? And so there's a study done, I think it was either the University of San Francisco or Stanford, one of those two. And I can't remember exact details of it, but it was sort of in the 30s. And then they reproduced the study again in the, I think, 80s. So massive gap. So like 50 years or something had passed. And those who had goals in that earlier study, they were actually found and researched again. And the research found that the people who had the goals early in life actually succeeded the most. Right? Now, success is a bit of a generic term, so I'm careful using that because success means different to everyone. But goals are simply directions in your life. And why wouldn't you want directions? So think of them as signposts. So imagine a plane just takes off and has no real goal to getting anywhere.
Yeah.
Or a boat that just kind of floats on water. Yeah. So there's got to be a navigation. So goals is the signpost to help navigate you, and they could be actually changed. So you can change the signpost. So when you reach a certain thing, you might want to change it. But what's important, actually, even before goals, is your values. It's a little bit probably not as effective to create goals that is not aligned to your inner core values. And so my values, for example, if you come and spend some time with me, say 7 days with me in my waking hours, there's really a handful of things that you'll see me do. So you've got the video on, so you can see one of the things is books. So I love reading, researching, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. I run multiple businesses. Obviously, business is a big thing. I serve customers, clients, and trying to become creative in business. And that includes finances and stuff, mastering finances. Health. So obviously, like yourself, I'm a practitioner. I give health, but also I take things for health to optimize my health. Yeah. Travel, like I told you earlier, I'm traveling next week. So now that that's open, I can do more of that. And family. So every day I'm doing something with family, or they're at my house and so on. Mm-hmm. So that's what my actions demonstrate. So now that I know what my actions are, I ask myself, are these actions allowing me to wake up and live an inspired life with fulfillment? If so, then that's my values. Mm. And then I make goals in pertinence to those values. Now, let's say I made a goal that has nothing to do with business. So let's just say I make a goal to clean the house and make sure the house is clean every week. That's completely against my values because I have no value on cleaning.
I hang up to that too.
Right? So it's a detriment for me to make a goal on cleaning when I have absolutely zero value on cleaning. Right? And so that's another reason why people go wrong, because they don't understand what their actions are demonstrating. So they create goals on doing things that defies and opposes the actual actions, because your actions don't lie. So I can tell you, I love business, I love traveling, I love family, I love health, and I love reading. But if you come and spend some time with me and you see that I'm constantly cursing my family, I eat junk every single day, I don't pick up the phone or contact one customer, I have not picked up one book in the whole time you've hung out with me, well, I'm a fraud, right? So I'm saying to you what I would love my life to look like, but that's kind of like not effective and productive because my values, which is my actions, are not demonstrating that. So I would like to encourage people, and this is what I do with every single client. The very first client, I rarely do a treatment, like a physical acupuncture treatment. I go through certain things. And the first thing is the values. What are your values demonstrating to me, right? Because it's pointless for me to work with your health if you have no value on health. Right? And then help you align a goal for that value, right? So just a quick example, a couple of people in my family were sort of type 2 diabetics. And because I have a value on health, I got all the books for them. I got all these supplements, these dietary regimes and protocols and exercise protocols. And I said, yep, this is what you need to do. None of them did none of them. Why? Because I'm simply projecting my need for health on them. And if they're in type 2 diabetic, well, clearly they don't have a very big value on health. Yeah. But one of them who loves reading books, I said, you know what? I found this book on type 2 diabetes. I'm wondering if you'll be interested in reading it. If not, let me know. I'll return it back into the library. That's all I said. I walked away. Yeah. And they read the book in 1 week and changed their life.
Wow.
Right? Because I simply relayed the information in their values.
Yeah.
So that it's easier for them because that would make sense. Whereas before I was being selfish and thinking about myself.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, make goals. They're signposts. It's better to be directed in life rather than scattered. And then try to make sure that your goals are based on and congruent with the actions that your life is demonstrating, which is your values.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. It's been amazing. I've got so many questions. I'm going to stop myself.
I've gone a few different tangents, so forgive me for that as well. But
I think it's,
I've covered.
I think it's amazing because I would watch this 10 times and I'll learn something new every single time, because there was a wealth of knowledge, and just shows how we've probably just done a drop in the ocean as to what you know. But I think it's something that people will watch over and over and over. Definitely, if I didn't want to write anything down because I didn't want to lose what you were saying. I had all these questions like, no, I'm really fixated on hearing what you're saying, because, to unravel this the mind and the psyche, it's so intertwined, and that's why it takes such a long time to go through those stages. But I would encourage anyone watching to re-watch this several times, because you'll definitely grasp different concepts, and probably when you're ready to hear it, it will resonate with you a little bit more. So that's been really incredible. I'm going to end it there because I know you're super busy, and I'm mindful of not taking up too much of your time, but I'm definitely going to have you on, if you're willing, in the future, because there's so many things that are in my head that I would love for you to dissect and explain, because I think it's just massive empowerment for people to know more, and then they can literally transform their life to what they want it to be. So I thank you for your time so much, and have safe travels next week. And slightly jealous, but that's for a topic for another show. But yeah, no, definitely thank you for your time, and I'll be sharing your info below. Is there any final words you wanted to say, or?
Yeah. Look, the psyche is always balanced, so always focus on what your perception is trying to tell you. And just lastly, every single human being has a story. Okay, so that story means it comes from an experience. And so life is a byproduct of our experiences. So when we make judgments on other people, you have to also really understand that they too have a story just like you. Yeah. So if you're trying to change someone because of a certain reason, you have to remember you too also have a story. So everyone has a story, and it's probably wise to make sure we remember that, because true love is different to animal love. And if we love people for who they are, they will love us for who we are.
Yeah, powerful. That's so true. That's definitely something to take home.
Thank you, Irene. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to coming back and doing some more chats with you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Now, I'll be adding more information, as I said, below. But if you need to reach out, I'll have our emails down, and be sure to ask any questions, because that's how we learn, that's how we grow, that's how we navigate through our journey of life. So again, thank you for your time, and I'll see you next time. Bye.